the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am your host, Vin Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And I'm joined again today by two co-hosts, one being Pete Brown from Microsoft. How you going, Pete?
Good.
Awesome. And the second one being Chris Mann from Link Audio. How you going, Chris?
I'm going very well. Vin, how are you?
Mate, living the dream, brother. Living the dream. And so this is our third show, and people are going to start talking, mate. We are the Music Tech Three Amigos by the look of it. But I think we should just continue on and.
But which one of us is Chevy Chase though?
No. There's none of that. That's just So, and look, we've come back, a bit earlier than I first anticipated. We usually do these music tech shows. Sometimes I was doing them once a year, and then I was doing them once every 6 months. But there's so much that's happened in the first 3 months this year that I thought I'll call you guys back and let's kind of do a bit of a roundup, because there is a stack to cover. There's some really cool stuff happening. So first thing I want to do is get just the DAWbench suite stuff out of the way, because where we left off on the last show, I was doing a stack of development and testing for the bus extension test. And that came about because the conversation on the forums was, DAWbench is not representing any type of serial single core processing.
Right.
And I mean, and in hindsight, they could have easily just loaded up a single channel, but that's either here or there. Hindsight's a great thing. But I went through the process and it's been a positive, by creating these bus extension tests, because there's two ways to actually test now for that serial load. And one was, and the original idea was preload all of the cores to, let's say 50%. That's what I decided on. We preload it to a 50%. And then what that does is it actually activates all the cores to a maximum all-core turbo. All right, so it's very steady at the clock. And then I apply a serial load, which will then apply an additional load to that, above the 50%. And, the theory was, well, that's going to land on a single core. And if you remember, the early discussion with Reaper was, well, it's not it's not happening. It's actually going across all the cores, all the available cores. So I got into some pretty in-depth discussions with Justin from Reaper, and I'm going to leave the super fine detail to Justin, because he's actually coming back at the end of the month. And I won't do the explanations justice, but we were kind of navigating, well, how's this serial process being parallelized? And he said, well, it's not necessarily being parallelized, but it is load balancing. And I couldn't get my head around that. But again, that's for Justin to actually explain in more detail. But what the practicality was that with AFX, or anticipative effects on, we were getting a very distinct load balance on the serial load. With AFX off, we saw the traditional load on a single core, up to 10 plugins. Then after the 10th plugin, it would maintain that load on the first core and then move the second lot, 11 to 20, to a second core, and anything above 20 would move to a third core. And this was something that Justin had said in one of the emails, where he said, well, yeah, the serial process for the first 10 plugins. And I didn't put two and two together, because the original dev machine wasn't wasn't able to achieve more than 10 plugins. It's only once I moved it to some of my latest dev machines with the Z690 and the little AMD machine that I built, 8-core AMD machine, that both of those are actually capable of over 20, one plugins. And I went, I know exactly what this thing is doing now.
So the 10 plugins is like a magic number that's not dependent upon the architecture or anything like that?
No, and then it moves it to a second. And that's why, remember Pete, when I'm saying Pete UK, he's going, mate, what's going on? It's landing on 2 cores. It's because he had AFX, right. He had a sip of effects accidentally off. But that let me on a bit of a, chasing my tail, because he didn't realize he had anti-sip of effects off, and we couldn't figure out what was different until I turned anti-sip of effects off. I'm going, by chance, have you got this setting up? He says, yeah. I went, okay, thank you, tick. So that was very, very interesting, right? That between the way that the load balancing was happening with AFX on and off with the serial load, and so it traditionally loads 1 with AFX off. As soon as you put the extended buffering on, it actually load balances. So I thought it would be a good idea to actually see how some of the other DAWs are behaving in exactly the same test scenario, right? And so I brought in Cubase and Studio One. Now, I purposely kept the testing on the smaller 6-core 12-thread. So Cubase's core limiting with ASIO guard off was not being affected. And I'm not going to say that magic word starting with M so early in the show, Pete, because
I almost got bingo.
You almost got one. If we start a drinking game, actually get a drink ready, because it is coming up later.
No, I'll be completely hammered by the end of this.
Right. So Cubase was working natively on the full 12 available logical cores. Reaper was working, of course, on the full 12 logical cores, and Studio One again. So it was as level as a playing field as I could get. The second variable was extended buffering on and off. Now I can say hybrid buffering or hybrid engine, but if I say extended buffering, if I say the extended buffering, we know that Reaper, it's anticeptive effects. Cubase is ASIO guard, and on Studio One, it's called DP, or dropout protection. All three of them work completely differently, which we'll get into a little bit later. So with Cubase, ASIO guard off, preload to 50, and then I started loading the serial, and it, as expected, it started loading 1 core. It was perfect. And then after about 15, 20 seconds, it actually dropped that core and moved it to another one. So it was like a square wave, right? So it immediately dropped it, and then another one picked it up. And another 15 seconds, guess what? It did exactly the same thing. I've gone,
that's weird.
What's it doing? So, Pete, I'm going to need some input from you here. So it's loading a core as expected, with that serial load with ASIO guard off. And then after a period of time, it would shift the core. Now, this is something that Justin mentioned in my email again. I wasn't getting it. He goes, it's not necessarily going to be all landing on 1 core, because the Windows task scheduler, after a specific amount of time, after a period of time, could shift it to another core. I've gone, really?
Well, they can control that, but yeah.
But I'm not seeing that in Reaper, but I saw it in Cubase. I thought, well, okay, that.
Because there's a cost to that. Like shifting a core has a cost associated with it. So I'm kind of surprised that's happening here.
Well, have a look at the screenshots. You'll see there's like a distinct square wave, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't as obvious in what I call the preload test, where we got a 50% and then the other core would load, but you could see it. When I went to the serial only test, which is no preload, just pure serial, you could see it. It literally looked like a square wave, right? So that was different to how Reaper was handling it with the extended buffering off. And so then I went to Studio One, and we did the usual thing. So we did the preload, and then the serial load, and again, it picked one core. So all three of them were with the extended buffering off. Now, when I say extended buffering off on Studio One, and Pete and Chris, these are the long discussions I've been having with Chris as well. And my understanding is that you can't switch dropout protection completely off. And there's some argument about that ongoing, but so the closest thing that I've got, and this is from some information from a trusted colleague, was that the closest you get is if you run it at minimum, and then there's a preset safety buffer on top of the hardware buffer, but it will scale per hardware buffer. So that was the closest I could get, and that's the mode I ran it in. So I put it in minimum, and preload with an extended serial load on top, exactly, just one core loaded with the serial load, one core completely, right?
Yeah.
So tick, tick, tick. All three of them were behaving in a similar manner with extended buffering off. Once we turn the extended buffering on, Reaper, I've already mentioned, completely load balanced across all of them.
Yep.
Cubase, to my surprise, did exactly the same thing. It was load balancing that serial bus process across all available logical, which I think is going to surprise a few Cubase users because, I'm sure they've been bitching about, single core performance and serial bus load. Well, I wasn't seeing it with ASIO card on. I am seeing a perfect load balance. Studio One behaved in exactly the same manner. So once I moved it to the higher dropout protection modes, whether it was medium, which is default, or high, it was behaving in exactly the same manner. So Studio One, it has a very consistent threading model when it comes to serial bus processing. Cubase and Reaper is dependent on whether the extended buffering is on and off. So again, I'm not a code guy. You might be able to help me with some of this. You may not. Again, we don't have to speculate on this stuff.
But my biggest takeaway from all this is, boy, all these DAW developers are doing incredible amounts of work to try to make it so you don't get dropouts from having too many plugins.
Yeah, no, of course. Now, the other side of this coin, and this wasn't my initial focus on the testing, was that, of course, because I introduced 2 extra DAWs, then that was going to open the peanut gallery straight away because, I had some comparative test results for the 3, okay?
Yeah.
And all of them were different. I mean, with the extended buffering off, Cubase and Reaper were not that far apart. And that kind of mirrors... I just checked the comparative shootout DAW stuff because this is not my first radio with the comparative stuff. From around 2011, and Cubase and Studio One were pretty much locked together, all right?
Makes sense.
And Studio One, Cubase, and Reaper were pretty much all locked together, the 3 of them, all right? And because that was all pre, hybrid engines and all the rest of it. So with the comparative performance, ASIO guard off, Reaper AFX off, very similar. Right, so there's not too far apart. So I was kind of happy with that. And again, it's not overly relevant with Cubase users with anything above 8 core because as soon as you turn ASIO guard off, you're going to lose half your logical -1, right? Because of the magic M word, right?
Right.
So it's irrelevant for that. But in the test environment, because I kept it at 612, right, and that was perfect. So when we got to Studio One though, it was measurably down on the number of plugins that we could run. And look, I had this conversation with Chris and I'm going, this is really sensitive type of stuff because we're not talking a little bit. I thought it was the performance variable was about 40%. It's not. It's actually 40 to 80%. That's massive. And we're talking, in some instances, almost double the amount of plugins that we could run at respective buffer latencies, right? So then I kicked in the ASIO guard, AFX, and moved the dropout protection for Studio One to its default, which is medium. and the other two took off, right, in number of plugins. Studio One didn't, and again we've got this massive variable again. So it's a bit concerning for me that there is so much performance variable between those engines. There's something going on with Studio One. I don't want to make too much. I don't want to focus on it too much because I want to actually talk to some relevant people about it. But there are some performance issues there, and it's not small. It was brought to my attention by one of my fans on the thread that well, if you're running it on medium and you're running a 512 buffer, you're not running dropout protection because if the dropout protection at medium is 512 block and you're running a 512 hardware buffer, then there's no dropout protection. I went, okay. So I went back and raised it to high and max. So, and then that actually raised the block buffer to 1024, 2048 respectively. The results on high, which had doubled the process block, was exactly the same, and on maximum, which was at 4 times, this is block, it was I think we got an extra 2 plugins, and it's still miles away.
Really, that's all.
That's it. And now that what I've learnt what the actual playback buffer is, well, actually, I need to get this confirmed because I was thinking originally that the process block was the playback buffer. It's not. I can actually tell you, right? It's it's 3 times the process block minus the hardware buffer. So at 512, it worked out that the buffer is 5 times the hardware buffer, and we didn't get any performance improvement. And then that would multiply again higher at maximum. So this is a discussion I'm going to have with some more relevant people.
Yeah. So what's the takeaway for anybody here at this? Like, I don't think anybody can make any DAW decisions based on this information.
No.
Yeah.
No. And again, this is why it's so sensitive. This is an area I didn't want to get into Cubase versus Reaper versus Studio One. I genuinely just went, look, I wanted to get an idea across the other 2 DAWs. I was genuinely surprised that was that much of a performance variable. So it's
cool that you're sharing all the early findings, though.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to go into getting into bash mode. This is not the intention. All right, it was never the intention. But if you remember, in the discussion that we had with Matthias when he was on, and I was bringing up that there was a shift in performance at a certain version where a couple of my clients experienced a really large performance drop to the point where they had to get off the platform. And I'm wondering if this is somehow related because we're not talking small amounts here. We're talking quite large. Now, look, the thing is, if you're a Studio One user and you haven't dabbled with other DAWs, you wouldn't know. You just simply wouldn't know.
Yeah.
What are you going to compare it against? So let's leave it at that because it is a larger subject and it's probably something we're going to be exploring a little bit deeper. Now, one thing that I do want
all great info though, Vin. Thanks for sharing that with everybody.
Yeah, not a problem. Now, one thing that I want to make a point just before we move off the DAWbench suite is that in the discussions with Justin, and I'm trying to get my head around, what maximum core and percentages and all the rest of it. And he introduced some really, and when I say cool, really cool new metrics in the performance meter, right? And I'll read them out, right? So one of the most important one was that you can change the readout from a all core, like a percentage, like a CPU percentage, to what he calls a 10C. And a 10C is actually the maximum load of a single core, right? Now, as soon as we change to that, we got a couple of really interesting things, right? So the CPU meter at the top starts reading, instead of the overall percentage, it'll read how much say if you've got 12 cores, for example, you'll see 10C, 20C, up to 12. If you get above 12, you clip. It's very obvious you've overloaded the whole CPU. So, I could sit there and monitor that and run the test right up to about 11.7, 11.8, 11.9, right? So it was, it's very exacting, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The second one was a real-time CPU, which is reading the real-time buffering of the engine away from, so AFX is on, but it's reading what the real-time engine is doing. So that's similar to what Cubase is showing with their real-time meter, right? That was the second one, which is really, really cool. And really only active once with AFX off. With AFX on, you have to be to the point where the machine has stopped before you see that real-time CPU start kicking in. The third one, which is absolutely brilliant for me and Pete, he calls it RT longest block, right? Real-time longest block. And then there's two parameters. And the right-hand parameter is the largest, the maximum block that you have. So it's in milliseconds. Let's say 3 milliseconds. And it doesn't always correlate exactly with the hardware buffer. I haven't quite worked that out, but that's a question I'm going to ask Justin. So let's say we've got 3 milliseconds, and you start loading this session up, and you see that the real-time longest block start moving. So it'll sit there, 0.1, 0.2, 1, Once it starts getting into close to the 3 milliseconds, you're close to that session clipping. Forget about the task manager. Forget about it. I don't even look at it anymore when I'm testing this stuff with Reaper. So I'm constantly watching that real-time longest block. And as soon as it tips into 3, and it goes into 301, 30, like if it's at 301, 302, 3.5, you might not hear them, but it's actually breaking up. Then you see this big spike, and it'll go to like 5 milliseconds, and the engine's gone, right? Yeah. So those 3 parameters has allowed myself and Pete over in the UK to monitor the exact performance of these audio engines at the respective latencies, and we know exactly when it's about to clip. Exactly. So that has been brilliant. So
that's awesome, because the advice to date has always been don't trust the meters in these applications.
Don't trust the meters. Yeah. Well, this is because I've had numerous conversations with Justin where I'm saying, what's going on with the performance meter? Because, the performance meter is saying one thing, and task manager's sitting at 100%, and your performance average is sitting at 40, 50. It's very, very confusing, but it's not happening on all systems. So he's obviously taken, some of what I've said on board, plus the difficulty I was having with trying to work out what was going on with when the cores are actually overloading. Because the simple thing that he said to me is, it doesn't matter what the task manager is saying or the load balancing is saying. When you have your bus, and this is where it becomes critical, when you start loading your bus serially, you still have 10C max load, one core load. Doesn't matter whether it sits there and load balances it. And to the absolute T, I can watch on the serial load, I can watch that bus, individual bus load, and I just keep loading serially, and I'm going, 0.6, 0.7, when I get into 0.9, 0.95, I know if I go one more, it's either going to land at 0.98, and that's a plug-in, or it's going to go over. And absolutely guaranteed that as soon as that bus load goes above 10C, one core load, bang, the engine drops out. So the new metering options, and for me, has been brilliant. So it just, again, makes Reaper the default testing platform for me has just gone from good to irreplaceable, pretty much. I'll still test the other doors, but I know exactly what's going on with that whole audio engine at the respective buffers and what it's doing with the actual cores, and I don't even have to look at Task Manager. So I've got to thank Justin.
Kudos to Justin for being so open with all this stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm probably like one of those, those buzzy flies around his ear, right? So, look, and Justin's always been open to this type of stuff, and he's awesome. So he's coming back at the end of the month, so that's going to be fun.
Yep.
All right. So I reckon we move into some of these tech releases, and no particular order, but I want to bring in one where Chris can have a bit of an input on this one because I'm going to nickname Chris Nostradamus because
Nostradamus?
Nostradamus, that's what they call me because my nostrils are a bit big. So Nostradamus, because in the last show, if you remember, we were discussing DSP. We were talking about why, when they need the processing going back to DP and why aren't they using GPUs, and we had the discussion that, look, the problem is, it's a hard nut to crack and, they can't parallelize all of those number of cores and, and it's always a latency problem. And lo and behold, there was a keynote last week or the week before, and it's a group of guys that have been working on this, and they're called GPU Audio. I'm not sure if you guys had a bit of a look at that keynote at all. Did you have a look at that keynote, Chris?
Yeah, I did. I watched the whole thing.
Yep. Thoughts?
Very interesting timing. This has been tried before.
Yes.
It's failed before.
Yes.
Real-time audio is what stops it usually.
Yes.
But I think this time round there's a difference. I think this needs to work. I think this has to work because of what's going on over at Apple.
Yep.
With the fact that M1 processors are getting bigger, there's more GPU cores available.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more processing on board that in DAW land we're not using.
Yep.
And I think it could work, but I'm going to be a little bit daring here and say that it probably real-time, the way that we listen to real-time audio in the way that we work, it probably needs to change a little bit.
Their approach, it needs to change?
Probably the approach in the DAW, in the fact that I think we're holding on to this has to be real-time a little bit too hard.
Yep.
And what I kind of mean by that just briefly is if you have 24 tracks of audio in your DAW and you have a bunch of plugins, bunch of EQs, compressors on all of them, say,
mm-hmm.
then we know already by a lot of the testing that at some point you're gonna overload your ASIO buffer. At some point you're gonna have a problem. But when you look at the workflow, you're typically working on one track at a time. You can only really adjust one EQ, one plugin at a time, and the other 23 are sitting there taking up very crucial resources when you're not tweaking them. So,
but aren't they already set? Haven't you already adjusted them? You don't have to necessarily. It doesn't have to be a real-time tweak of an EQ.
Well, but it does sit there until you render that channel out. And
right.
if you were to render that EQ channel out, then the resources of those plugins are no longer needed. But we tend to not render them out until the end.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to leave them all open. And I just wonder if there is some scope and some room to have offline processing in the background where, if you have a 5-minute, 6-minute song and you have a lot of tracks and you have, well, let's say 24 tracks and you're playing around, the time that it would take to render those tracks out per track, even on a very entry-level machine, is probably about 1 to 2 seconds. It doesn't take long to render these out. They're small files, CPU processing power available. So I just kind of wonder whether audio needs to take a little bit of a book from video land where it can render them out in the background quickly and free up CPU resources or use GPU resources to do that rendering in the background. It's not going to work for everything. It's not going to work for side chaining and busing, but I just kind of wonder if you were to touch a track, finish modifying it a little bit and then letting it go, whether it couldn't just go in the background, render the audio and then kind of give you multiple undos. So you'd be looking at possibly an original audio file and then a process file. And really, if you could get this to work quick enough, and I think people would probably wait 1 to 2 seconds for a track to render in the background before they played it, you could almost have a situation where you were down to having, a bunch of audio tracks rendered and having some sort of real-time control, maybe when it's required or when you retouch the track again, but to free up CPU resources.
Mm.
Because that's what happens on a video timeline. You've got it there, you make adjustment, it sits in the background and renders away. The key difference, obviously, is that it's perfectly okay for a second to watch some dialed down video where the resolution has gone down a little bit. It's obviously not okay for that to happen on a DAW. We don't want to hear, something that's a WAV file back down to an MP3 suddenly. But I think if it changes, then GPU assist is a big thing. I think it could really change. It's the next step on the DAW.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only aspect I'm going to say about that, Chris, is the difference between the professional audio stuff and the video editing is that we are relying on low latency real time. That's the thing. I understand what you're saying, but I don't really think it's necessary with the current resources that we have. You know what I mean? Look, it might be okay if there's an option, but I don't think that's where they're going with it. I mean, I've had some conversations with these guys because they're coming on the show as well. And their whole premise was that they needed to get the GPU to process the audio with a round trip of less than 1 millisecond, which they have achieved, right? So I don't think it really needs to be rendering in the background. But it is interesting. Look, I've never heard of anyone actually even approach, a DAW processing like that. So I'm not going to rule it out, but I don't think that's what they're aiming for. They've got, apart from DAWs, they've got some other avenues of where this GPU audio thing is going, and I'm wondering if that some of what you've just said there could work better in some of the non-real time.
I think the problem they're going to have, though, is that it's going to work okay for a small amount of tracks. I think where this tends to fail a little bit is when there's a large amount of tracks.
Yep.
I don't think that's where anyone's going either, but I have another prediction to make.
Yes.
And I think that's where – you ready for this one?
Yes.
I think that's where Logic is going to go, because I think when Apple and the engineers from that work purely on Logic DAW are going to work out how to process plugins on the massive amount of available GPU cores that they have in M1.
Yeah, no, of course.
And when they do that, Logic's going to be able to load up about 25,000 plugins more than anyone else.
Yeah.
It's true. There's so much processing power, not only in the GPU cores, but in the neutral cores as well, especially on the new chips that we'll talk about a bit later. Yep. So it is interesting. I think on the Windows side, on the Microsoft side, that to be able to have some form of hybrid on and off processing in the background where it could be valid could definitely be a thing. Yep.
You got any thoughts on it, Pete?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, what might these companies do that's above and beyond what's happening today? Like, instead of just offloading existing things, but will it be used to enable something new or create new types of audio processing or new types of instruments or something like that?
Like I said, the scope isn't just DAWs. They had about 5 or 6 different industry targets in that keynote. So again, obviously, I'm only just focusing on the DAW processing side of it. So, and I will say this: I am going to throw in a dedicated card into one of the dev machines away from my GPU, and I'm going to do some proof of concept stuff. I know Pete from Scan's already done it. This thing is working. It is working, and it is working within the latency figures that they're actually reporting. How well is it going to work? This is something that I'm going to be diving into. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is diving in with a small graphics card. I'm not going to be throwing some big RTX 3080 or something in there. I've got a little baby 1030. Now, the reason I'm doing that is, again, it's proof of concept stuff. How much resource is because they've got a convolution reverb as their proof of concept plugin that they're offering. How much resource is that taking, and how many of them can I run on a baby 1030? Because that'll be a nice little baseline for me, and then we can start dealing with the larger cards. Now, there's a whole host of plugins that are coming. I think within the next 2 months. I've seen screens and you know, they've shared some internal screens and stuff with all of the plugins.
I'm just hopeful that the shortages go away and these cards become affordable again when folks are actually interested in using them, because musicians having to pay through the nose for super great graphics cards is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, there is that. But if they can, like Chris was saying, what if they can leverage the M1 internal GPU? What if they can leverage the internal Intel GPUs?
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's NVIDIA. They're in the final beta for the AMD cards. The AMD. I call them ATI, but you know the AMD cards. I don't think they'll be too far away from using the internal stuff. I'd much prefer to not use internal. I'd prefer to use the dedicated thing, and that's what I'm going to be testing first off. So. Well, look, it's exciting. We've got we're going to have these guys on so they can actually explain this in far more detail.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So that's a good one. And perfect timing. Last Friday, UAD reported that they're offering native plugins, and we went, wow, coinky dink. We got a GPU audio keynote, an announcement, and a proof of concept, and the following week we get UAD saying, "Hey, we got some native plugins coming." I find that very, very interesting, and it's not their whole plugin suite yet, but they're promising that they're going to be expanding that. Interestingly, it's also on a subscription only. And that was another discussion that we had. And I think you can buy it outright if you own a DSP card, and they'll give you can get a native version as well. So that's another.
As long as you already own the plugin, I think is the way it goes.
Is that the way it's going? Yeah, I was reading it, and there's, one thing that I was, reading in between the lines, and I'm a little concerned about is that, again, UAD are focusing on Mac only. Now, for the Mac listeners, they're going to go, and so what? But being Windows focused, UAD seem to be having a very distinct focus on Mac only of late. Luna, that turns 2 this month, guys. So Luna turns 2 this month, and there is not a whisper about it being ported to Windows. So I don't know what that says in the greater scheme of things, except that, UAD is not something that I particularly focus on, because they seem to be focusing away from the Windows platform more and more. And we'll just see where this native stuff.
Yeah, they seem to come and go in waves.
Yeah, but 2 years, Pete?
Yeah. For Luna, who knows, right? But I'm saying UAD in general seems to come and go in waves when it comes to Windows support.
Yeah.
I think it depends on who's managing the products at that point in time.
Right.
I think we were looking at this internally at work last week because we did dive a little bit deeper into it. It is saying that there's Windows support coming in fall 2022 for the Spark, for the subscription plugins. What's interesting, though, is the Vault 2 and the Vault 276, which is their new entry-level audio interfaces, have some form of DSP on them. The small one does like mic preamp emulation, and I think as you move up, you get some compression emulation inside. Mm-hmm. But those interfaces have been bundled with Relab, Brainworks, Marshall, Softtube plugins, and they've done that purely because every other interface at that price point offers the same thing.
Yep.
Part of me sort of feels like this is their way of saying we don't want to bundle everyone else's plugins with our hardware. So I think at the moment when you buy a Vault 2, you actually get a 30-day free subscription to this Spark service.
Right.
And it's smart. I think most people that buy the hardware will try the Spark, and they'll probably jump on the subscription and tie them back into their own plugins again. So
of course.
I think it's an internal kind of marketing situation. You are right. It's not every plugin, whether or not there's some restrictions on some of those manufacturers going, we don't want you to license the native version because maybe we already do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. It is an interesting aspect for the small interfaces to be able to offer that, and I think that makes them more attractive. But we'll see. It is a bit of a left turn for them. So
Yep.
good for everyone else. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they follow up with that Windows support, which is not that far away. When's fall, Pete? Always get mixed up with those words. Is that a couple of months away?
Well, it's spring now, so half a year.
Oh, okay. So it's a little while off still.
Yeah, it's our spring, Chris. So what, September?
Yeah.
September-ish.
I'm looking forward to it, though. I'll definitely give it a try when it comes out.
Yeah. Well, look, and with the limited number of plugins, I think you might be right, Chris, in regards to, they've got things like Brainworks and SoftTube and a few others that they have licensed for their DSP, and all of those companies are actually got native versions. So, there's no point them offering those ones. But it will be interesting moving forward to see where that lands, because they've always said that you can't run their plugin algorithms on DSP. They just on native, because they require a dedicated DSP process. Now on that little Volt thing, is that just like a single Shark chip? Is that what it is, or is it something else?
I think for the price of the interface, it's probably not a Shark chip. I think it's probably just something else. It's literally just embedded inside the preamp, so you don't have any access to it outside of the control panel.
Right. So it doesn't run their regular UAD.
No. Just one. You got one option. You got like you drop down and you say it's this preamp emulation. You can't load whatever plugin you want into it. It's a little bit like what Apogee do with the Duet. So you've got the channel strip sort of embedded into the interface.
Yep.
And as you go up in the models, you get more and more stuff. So there's more and more processing power available.
Right. So it would be just a small FPGA, but that's.
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not. There's nothing against that. The FPGAs have been used quite successfully and quite powerful. So
Vin, sorry. One last thing on the UAD and Windows and stuff like that.
Yep.
One thing that we have to keep in mind with all these companies is they've been spending the last couple of years working on their Mac OS ports for Apple Silicon.
Yep.
And so they do tend to focus a bit on Mac right now. And, I think that'll come back later, but they've been heads down in Mac world here for a couple of years.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Due to something they were forced to do.
Yep. Yes. No, of course. I think we can move on to Cubase 12.
And Nuendo 12 this week, right?
Nuendo 12. Yes. Chris, being the ex-Nuendo product specialist for Australia.
That was a while ago.
A long time ago, past life. Okay, so Cubase 12, we had a bit of a discussion about, I was hearing the Benny Hill theme when it was coming to the transition of the e-licenser. Did that eventuate the Benny Hill theme? Yeah, to an extent, but I will clarify some concerns that I had previously where I thought that it would kill off the Cubase 11 license off the e-licenser, and it doesn't. So let me be 100% clear. What it does is if you've got a Cubase 11 license on your e-licenser and you buy your update to Cubase 12, it does a few handshakes between e-licenser and their new licensing app. I can't remember what it's called, and it just sits there and bounces between 3 web browsers and all the rest of it. I'm hearing some horror stories about it, but it eventually resyncs your e-licenser Cubase 11 license and then marks it as non-upgradable. So you've still got your perpetual Cubase 11 license in hardware. Phew, that's a few for me. And then you've got your 3 Cubase 12 licenses with the new licensing. So again, you read the reports, a few people were losing their Cubase 11 license for a while and then it was reappearing. And so they smoothed all of that licensing side of it up.
Good.
So it wasn't quite Benny Hill. Well, actually, no, it still is Benny Hill. And let me just have I'm going to put on my bitch face now, right? Because while they were transitioning, and it was straight after the show that we did last time, and I was saying, what's going on with these e-licenses? It's throwing up these, it's reporting that I'm, the machine profile has changed and they're disabling these software licenses that I don't own, right? And I'm thinking, this thing is dialing home. So it's dialing home, and it's pinging the e-licenser server, and then somehow it's thinking that my system has changed, and then it's saying, well, we're disabling these licenses, e-licenses, soft e-licenses. Guys, I didn't own any of the soft e-licenses that it was bitching about, all right? And so I've gone, what the fuck is this thing doing? But as, perfect timing would have it, while I was editing that last show, and I think you guys know about this because I was screaming about this, while I was editing that last show, and right around the time I was bitching about, the Benny Hill theme for Cubase 12, pops this message, right, in the middle of the session that it was disabling these software e-licenses, and it crashed my fucking session. Let me tell you, I'm swearing because I wasn't happy, right? So the audio interface dropped out. It crashed the session. Up come these stupid messages about these soft e-licenses. So in the middle of my session, the e-licenser application phoned home and decided that it was going to interrupt what I was doing and complain about these licenses that I don't own, and then crashed the e-license out. Luckily, I was able to save the session, and it was a real mess getting out of Cubase. But then I fired it back up. It wasn't in my last save. I'm going, shit, I've lost this. And I'd probably put in 8 hours of editing in this. I was not happy. And but I know it's probably about, there wasn't 8 hours of, if I'd lost that session, I would have been not quite 8 hours, but it was a few hours at least because I'd had some pre-saves. Luckily, I went through into the program folder, and it was there, and it fired back up again. And so that was okay. But since then, these e-licenser messages are still continuing, and they bounce out my audio interface, and they're crashing sessions out. And I've gone, can you guys just stop? Right? This is ridiculous. And so I don't know what's going on with the e-licenser transition stuff. So there's no reason, absolutely, and let me reiterate this, there is absolutely no reason for my e-licenser application, and the machine's online all the time, so it's obviously pinging, right? There's no reason for it to actually ping that license server. None. I don't have any software e-licenses. So my question to Steinberg, which I doubt will be listening in, is what the fuck are you doing, right? What data are you actually pinging my machine for, and then reporting that I don't own these specific licenses and interrupting my workflow? That is so annoying. So what do I have to do? Do I have to pull the machine offline every time I'm using Cubase now? And on that note,
boy, Vin, do I hate copy protection.
Yeah,
we've had that discussion before.
Yes,
man.
Yes. And the other discussion that we had in regards to this Cubase 12 transition was, remember the whole argument about, we're going to be checking the server every 30 days, and then there was they actually said 12 months, and then there's an option that you can be completely offline for 12 months. Then they did the complete 180, which I gave them a golf clap for, and they just said, you know what, we've listened to the feedback, and no, we're not going to be touching a perpetual license. It's not going to be dialing home. It doesn't need to be dialing home. Good, yes, no, because I'm reading in between the lines. I saw a report where an end user, now I don't know why he does this, but he leaves the machine on, right? He leaves the machine on, but he switches off his internet. Something about, knocking the kids off, or else they stay up to 3 a.m. I think, me and Pete will probably understand that
right.
If we could turn off the internet, it'd probably get the kids to bed a bit earlier. So he would turn off the internet. The machine was still running. And then he'd come back into the next day, fire up his internet again, and guess what wouldn't fire up? Cubase 12. Because it somehow, at some point, that new licensing application had been pinging and said, hey, you don't have an internet connection, and I'm not allowing you to start the application. And the only way you can get it back is you have to restart the machine with the internet connection going. So you tell me that Cubase isn't still pinging home on Cubase 12. They're pinging home. So I think they've been a bit disingenuous, but that was kind of like an odd situation where the guy's leaving the machine on and turning the internet off. But it did highlight, hang on, you're still dialing home, guys. So let's be a little bit more upfront about it.
Getting ready for subscriptions.
And that's a situation that can happen anywhere. Like, if you bring the PC someplace else to go and work, like having to then go connect to some Wi-Fi hotspot or something just so you can start the app, that's not great.
But that's what they said that they were going to roll back.
Know. Yeah, right.
So, from what that end user's experience, that's saying to me, no, it's still pinging home, and there's a potential for that program not to start. So I'll just sit back. I'm still hearing the Benny Hill theme, to tell you the truth, right? So, and look, the soft e-licenser that everyone is thinking, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going, you do know that it's constantly talking back to the e-licenser, to the, the iLock, the soft iLock. It is constantly talking to the iLock. Get the hardware key, guys. Just stick with the key. I love my key, but I'm not gigging. So I can see, where the soft one can actually work. But
I just like it if the key was like smaller than this massive dongle that has to hang off the side of your laptop. So.
Yeah, which one have you got? I mean, I've got the big blue one.
I have like a really old one.
Oh, like a really old.
I think it's blue, actually.
Yeah, I've got 3 of them. I got the original. Remember the original ones, Chris? The big ones that had the handle on them, right? That was the big one. And then I've got the we'll call it the mid-sized blue one, and then they've got the little silver ones. But I think there's a USB-C one. Is that smaller again? It has to be.
Oh, okay.
I think they're getting smaller.
They can fit 512 gig or whatever into something that's no larger than the USB plug itself. So, like, there's no reason the e-licenser needs to be enormous.
Yeah. Well, look.
Anyway,
it's all moving away. It's all moving away from the hardware. It's going to the software. So we're
the last ones.
Yes, we're going to just have to be moving. I'm still going to be hanging on to my hardware. I just.
Hey, Vin.
Yeah.
I hate license and copy protection.
Yes, I know, mate. Hang on. See, that's your kryptonite, right?
That's my bingo entry.
That's your bingo entry, right? So hang on. We're going to start getting some scotches, and then when Chris starts,
right.
And so what's Chris's kryptonite? What's your kryptonite, Chris?
Oh,
he's having a bit of a think.
4:30 in the morning podcast, maybe.
Sorry, man. I'll put you on the spot.
I'll get back to you. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I put you on the spot. So mine starts with M. Pete starts with CP, and we'll wait for Chris's kryptonite. So look, just going over some other new release stuff. I don't have a lot here. I've got Harrison Mixbus V8, and the reason I put that down is that it's introduced a clip launching, and this is something that myself and Pete were discussing with Paul, who's the key developer over at Ardua, and he said that he was introducing the clip launching. Now Mixbus is based on Ardua, and they've actually, leapfrogged over the top of the Ardua 8 release, and then they've done it first. So that's an interesting one. It is an interesting one for Harrison Mixbus, because the majority of people that are using that is purely for mixing. They're not. I don't see it's a really strange one. I don't really see.
Yeah, I was somewhat confused by clip launching there. I'm sure it makes sense. I'm just not a user of it, but it seemed like an odd combo.
Yeah, well, for Mixbus, I mean, for Ardua maybe because they've got a kind of they've got a wider scope of end users, but Mixbus primarily these are the people that use other DAWs, and then they're track laying, and then they're doing the mixing in the Mixbus bus engine. So, but look, I thought it was worth a mention. So that was pretty interesting. I think. So I think let's move on to the ongoing circus of the chip shortages. So we've had some ongoing impacts to supply, and this is kind of like it's still a knock-on effect from the AKM fire back in 2020. And that's starting to kind of resolve itself. Chris might have a little bit more information on that as well.
Not really.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we've been notified again of probably another 12 to 15 product discontinues.
Oh,
ouch.
Because it's starting to spread to analog devices, chips, and everyone that's gone to a different manufacturer to source different chips, and now they're really struggling with supply too. Some of that stuff's still 36 to 52 weeks.
Oh, shit.
So it is, and there's lots of changes on products. So it feels like it's getting better, but there's sacrifice. So I know we've got some I/O boards that go into certain interfaces where the 8x8 might be a bit less popular than the 16x16, so they've just stopped the 8x8 so they don't use up valuable ICs that they don't have.
Yes.
There's lots of that going on. So that it's taking its time. And I did read an interesting article about this probably a few months back, which was somebody just questioning, well, why don't they just open up new production lines and just make more chips? And the kind of answer to that was, well, that's not cost effective because they know that that's a multi-million-dollar outlay, and it'll solve the peak. But what will happen is when the peak goes away, then the demand isn't there. So that investment is not worthwhile. And that kind of makes some sense. But it also kind of means that I don't think they're particularly concerned, these chip manufacturers, because they're selling everything they're making.
Yep.
And it would be nice if it sort of started to wind back. We have seen things come from 52 to 36 to kind of 26 weeks, but it's still a thing. It's still a massive shortage.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that it was over. I was okay. So I was getting a false impression that we were starting to see light at the end of the tunnel, and what you've just told me makes a bit of sense because I've got some of the other interface manufacturers where their larger I/O units were supposed to be landing in March, then they're supposed to be landing in April, and now they're saying end of May. So that is May, and also that whole robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing where they're minimising the chips into one product and another. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that's amazing. That's still, so the dominoes are still happening there.
Chris, did you say 50 weeks for some of them?
Yep.
Did I hear that right?
Yep.
Damn, that's a year.
Yep.
Wow.
That's why a lot of them have just been discontinued. They've just gone discontinued for now because at 52 weeks, we don't even know we're going to get them.
That is really worrying. I mean, that's got the potential to tip some of these companies over. Has to.
It's affecting the high-end interfaces. That's the kind of thing that annoys me a little bit. The demand is in the more expensive units, in the more of the Pro line stuff. There's not really doesn't seem to be as big an issue in the cheaper interfaces that are using slightly cheaper chips. They seem to have probably bounced back a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
But to start losing a lot of your top-end lines like that, it's really frustrating. Well, maybe this could be my kryptonite. Short supply of chips.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I know about the FPGA shortages as well, and I think you mentioned some of the others as well. So I think this is, I don't think we're out of it yet. But I didn't quite realize it was still that bad. So okay, so this is another conversation we're still going to be having in 3 months in our half year roundup by the sound of it.
Yeah, we've got products that we haven't seen for probably 15 to 18 months that we don't think are coming back.
And, the interesting thing is that I bet you some of those companies are not officially killing them off yet, are they?
Nope.
They'll just leave you hanging. Yeah.
Shit. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Not a good thing. Well, on that note, let's move on to some more cheery stuff. CPU wars. So, what was the big thing over the last month or so that has sent people into hysterics? Mac Studio got announced, which is 2 M1 Maxes. So now what do they call it? M1 Ultra. All right.
Yep.
what's going to be the next one? Mega? I don't know. So it's essentially two M1 Maxes. Chris, you're going to have to help me out here, right?
They slapped them together.
They slapped them together. So that opens up a little bit of critical thinking for me in the sense that, well, what's going on with their fab capabilities, right?
It's kind of the AMD playbook.
It is, right? So they've got, have they actually hit the limit of the number of chips that they can fit? And they're having to start, and if they're already gluing things together, that is exactly the AMD playbook. It happens to be the same fab, I think, TSMC. I think they're doing the Apple stuff. But isn't it, reading in between the lines, isn't it a bit of a hint that if you're going to go even more cores, what are you going to do? You're just going to keep gluing 8-core chips together. And they seem to be focusing a lot more on the GPU side of things, as Chris mentioned. But have they hit a fab limit? And is it because of the number of GPUs that they got on the thing?
Let me leave this to Chris, but I do want to say that one thing that we should consider here is that this is also related to shortages and like you're saying, fab capacity and stuff, and not necessarily, although it can't be ruled out, but not necessarily a technological limitation with the chip design.
Right.
But more just, I don't want to say a cost savings, but the most cost-effective short-term approach.
Do you actually think this is an interim thing?
Yep. This is the part of the master plan. I don't know. I would suggest that doing it this way probably also keeps the heat down. It probably also keeps the power consumption down.
But is it? I mean,
yep.
You're gluing chips together, right?
No, a lot of the initial tests that are going on with people getting their hands on the first ones are certainly seeing massive performance jumps with not a lot of power consumption.
Okay.
But there's a couple of things to note here. And that's obviously how it relates to doors, because that's what we care about the most.
Mm-hmm.
And this is I guess this is what I was looking back at the GPU thing is that, well, you do now have this package. Let's call it a package. CPU cores, GPU cores, neutral, engines, more cores available to you. Now you go off and buy one of these, looks nice. But you're not really using this chip to its maximum efficiency, are you? Because all we're really landing door processing on is the CPU cores.
And only the performance cores.
Correct. So there is room for scope for that to improve here. A lot of and for everyone out there, always try and understand what you're looking at when you look at a lot of these YouTubers and, I've run this test and it's like 80% faster than the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
You look at a lot of the tests that are out there and they are purely based on processing information, rendering, exporting, processing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Most of it's photo, most of it's video, most of it's 3D animation, and the results that they're getting are fairly standout. I mean, there is no question when it comes to a render that this Ultra machine, the 20-core job, is certainly rendering out video faster than one my Mac Pro can.
Yep.
At that last stage of the master export, and in Doorland, we don't spend a lot of time on that because our final exports, when we finally finish that one song after 6 months we've been working on, only takes about 5 minutes. So it's not a big thing here. And in a lot of the testing that has been posted, we're seeing that there isn't a massive advantage on how many plugins we can load in that session. So there is a lot of untapped resource here. Now, in video world, in Photoshop world, I mean, the Ultra for me, because tracking M1, M1 Pro, even M1 Max, what we've seen is a massive increase in processing. But when you've gone down to the nitty gritty of getting, high definition video, multicam on the timeline, we've always seen playback errors and it not performing during the actual workflow process of what you're trying to do. The Ultra seems to have tipped over that. The initial little bit of testing is showing some very good performance even on there. So gluing chips together seems to be working. I would say that the next machine is probably going to be a studio machine that has PCI slots for some of the people that still want to run RAID and still want to run big graphics cards if they can work out how to implement that. So it is the tip of the iceberg. I don't think it's going to stop. And I think it is going to be important in audio world for us to start working out how to make the most use out of what this package can do. But also, we do also have big graphics cards sometimes in our Windows machines that are sitting there when we're loading a DAW doing absolutely nothing. So, it is a very interesting time. It's not the solution for everyone. I mean, this latest Ultra machine, the 20-core with either 48 or 64 GPU cores and the 32-core neutral energy. I mean, it's like an $8,000 machine in Australia.
Yeah.
Let's not, get too excited. It's a lot of money, but if you're rendering, video or you're rendering 3D, that's about to save you a lot of time, and it's probably going to put in an extra one or two projects in a 3-month period that you're just doing purely on saving rendering time. So this is a big turn. I think this is a bit of a Steve Jobs moment. It is probably the most interesting thing they've done in a long time.
Yep.
Chris, do you really think they will go back to bringing PCI in?
I think there's still applications that
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the PCI machine, I think, will be the one that replaces eventually the Mac Pro. I think so, because, you look at all these tests and they're run off the 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte internal drive. Well, that's not going to help me. I mean, I go off and do a video project and bring 500 gigabytes of video on there. So what happens when you run these tests off a Thunderbolt drive? I can tell you right now, they slow right down. So there is I think there is room for, having that, but we'll see. Maybe not, but maybe. I would be very disappointed if they don't.
I totally agree. It just seems like they've moved so far away from that to see them kind of backpedal a bit, which would be welcome.
Yeah,
would be unexpected.
Yeah,
don't disagree with you. I think, and maybe that's why they possibly keep that one machine that still runs on Intel. Maybe there is a 12th gen that is on the table for that. I don't know. It's very interesting to know, but the tests that come out with Ultra now, with people doing real time things, are probably going to surprise a lot of people. Just be aware that in DAW land, we're not seeing a lot of that boost.
No.
Not yet. And maybe things like the GPU audio keynotes that have been going on does start to get a lot of these manufacturers going, maybe there's things we can do here.
Yep.
That might benefit people.
Yep. Well, what I'll do is I'll quickly do a quick roundup of some of my Intel 12th gen internal dev, because I did some testing outside of the square, so to speak, because I wanted to test the 12th gen on Windows 10 for various reasons, and I wanted to see how that thread director was scheduling the threads within Windows 10 and a DAW environment. I wasn't really interested in any other things. I just wanted to. So this was an internal test just for myself, so that I had a baseline for Windows 10 versus Windows 11, right? So I did a couple of things. One is I tested it on Windows 10 with and without the E-cores, and got some numbers, and then I tested it in a virtual instrument environment, a straight parallel plugin environment, and then with a busing environment. And I'll just quickly tell you the summary of all of that, right, on Windows 10, that, and again with Reaper, and I don't know what application level optimization needs to be done to be talking to that thread director and then to the Windows scheduling. But so with Reaper in the standard parallel test, it wasn't favoring the performance cores. Everything was kind of loading relatively evenly. I think the performance cores were loading a little bit quicker than the economy cores. But, it ran a stack of plugins and it was very, very stable. So I just thought, okay, so that kind of works. And then I did exactly the same with the virtual instrument test. And then I did it with and without the E-cores and got a baseline difference in measurement. And I can tell you now that it was between 25 and 30% performance improvement with the E-cores on. So those things might be called economy cores, but there was a 30% DAW performance advantage by leaving them on, even in Windows 10, where they're not kind of thread directing correctly, right? So that's
Great.
You can't sneeze at 30%, So that was good. So my initial idea was, well, hey, if E-cores are giving us single number figures, I'm going to switch it off and offer Windows 10 machines. That didn't pan out, right? So that was one. The one that was really interesting though, but I mean the scheduling itself was not horrible, right? So everything was kind of load balancing, primarily on the P cores, performance cores, but the E cores were also loading up probably earlier than what I would have thought, right?
Yeah, because I always thought it would be all the OS and other stuff would end up on the E cores and the DAW would take over the P cores, but sounds like that's not the case.
That wasn't happening in Windows 10, right?
Yeah.
So what was really interesting though is that when I fired up the bus test, and then so it's the 80-track multiprocessor plugin test, but then I've included 10 buses with 8 tracks per bus. Now, as soon as I fired that up and I started parallel loading the plugins, wait for this one, they completely ignored the P cores and everything landed on the E cores. And I'm looking at this going, what the fuck just happened there, right? Because I wasn't loading the bus. I was actually loading the track inserts, right? Crossed horizontally, and it was not, none of it was landing on the P cores. And the only thing that was different was that I included buses in that Reaper session. So somehow, just the logistics of that session confused the thread scheduling from Reaper via the thread director, because the thread director on Windows 10 is not fully working, it's only partially working. And it went, okay, I'm going to put you on the E cores. And that immediately just sunk my whole Windows 10 development. I'm going, wow, that is just, I can, no way.
Yeah.
So at that point, I moved it over to Windows 11. There was a few gremlins there, which I'm not going to be sharing publicly, but there was a few gremlins. I had to arm wrestle the Windows 11 installation on the Z690, and these are DDR4 systems. And then I had all the baselines, and then I ran all the tests again, eCore on and off, and then I was watching the scheduling, and it was, it was still hitting the eCores, guys, but you could see that it was focusing more on the P cores, and then as the P cores were getting up, then there was more load landing on the E cores, but it wasn't ignoring them. There's no way it was ignoring them. It was actually still load balancing to a certain degree to the E cores, even with just the standard tests. And then I ran the bus test and closed one eye and went, okay, here we go, and it scheduled perfectly. So that is
great.
That is something between Reaper. So the app, we won't signal out Reaper. It's something about something to do with the application and the way that it's actually talking to the Windows scheduling via the thread director on Windows 10, because it's only partially supported, that completely confused it. And that actually supported some other reports that I was reading where they were doing more like gaming and just regular kind of benchy type of stuff with the 12th gen on Windows 10. And they said, for the most part, the scheduling works, well enough. You could even turn the E-cores off. But they also had certain applications where it got completely confused and landed on the E-cores. And I actually witnessed that personally. I went, right. So 12th gen is definitely a Windows 11 environment, unless Microsoft backport that full thread director support the Windows 10. I know we've had this discussion, Pete. I know you have no idea.
Yeah, so it's a Windows 11 thing.
So it's a Windows 11. Let's just say it's a Windows 11 thing. But interestingly, I had a client in the last week that was tossing up between my 12th gen and my my very well established 299 machines, and the only real variable, because he was saying, well, which way should I go? And I was giving him, the pros and cons for each system. And I said, well, this one runs on Windows, needs to run on Windows 11. This one runs on Windows 10. He says, I don't want Windows 11, man. Give me that one. It was just immediate. He's like, no, I don't want Windows 11. Can I have the other machine? So that was the deciding factor, literally. All right. Yep. So there is still some reluctance of certain people to be going to Windows 11. So Microsoft have a little bit of work to do there. My qualms with it.
Yep. It's only like 6 months old. There's going to be the usual waiting period, et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but some of the look, I'm not. I don't have any fundamental problems with the actual stability of and the operating system overall. To me, it's this whole Windows 8 thing again. This is when we first met, when I was having a little bit of a commentary about why I dislike Windows 8, and you actually approached me on the forum. We had a a bit of a to and fro discussion, which ended up being a fantastic friendship. But initially, we were not.
Then you're a pain in my ass. That's we'll just leave it there.
Yeah, and I still am. But that's all right. That's all right.
But it's good. It's all worked out. So
I'm that buzzy fly, around your ear.
It's good because you help keep us honest.
Yeah. Look, to me, that's my main gripe with Windows 11 is as you know, is the task, just the taskbar design and lack of. It just doesn't feel complete. Still doesn't feel complete. But if I show you a screenshot of my Windows 11, you'll have a heart attack.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll replace it.
Well, it's already gone. It's already gone. Look, my Windows 11 looks like Windows 10.
Right.
For every aspect. And I'm not going to tell you how I did it, and it's no third party paid for app and all the rest of it, because the only reason I'm not even sure whether I'm going to deploy it, because I need to finish testing it, but it seems very, very stable. I've got all my right-click taskbar, all of the things that I was bitching to you about. I'm going, where the hell's the bloody, where's the shortcut for the task manager? Where's the shortcut for this? That's all back. And it didn't take much. And again, I'm not a code guy, but it seemed to be the only thing that was involved was an inclusion of a registry key, and it brought back the Windows 10 taskbar. So really, how far away is it?
So the taskbar and stuff here is all new. I will say that the team the shell team that's been working on this has made a bunch of improvements to it over, probably since you last looked at it. Cause I've got the right click stuff for task manager and all that kind of stuff here. Yep. And this is a regular release build.
Yep.
But they've also, in the insider builds, have fixed a ton of stuff. So I think we'll get there. I as much as the team would hate me to say this, I kind of agree that we're not quite there yet, but I would not be so concerned about it in the future, honestly.
Yeah. So to me, it just feels unfinished. That's the best way for me to explain it. I don't care that it sits in the middle, because you can move it to the left, and if you want an alternate to the standard menu, they're available without. There's a little bit of work involved, but there's not too much work. For me, it just feels a little bit unfinished, especially like I'm trying to call up the task manager and I couldn't find it. I go, where the fuck is this thing? And I've gone, how could they possibly have omitted that? And when I said to you, I said, Pete, why is this broken? You said to me, oh, no, it's not. Well, it's a work in progress. I think the nicest way I think I can put it is it's basically a work in progress. So let's leave it at that. There's not any major performance things that I am witnessing on the Intel.
Good.
I think there might be a small percentage variable between the AMD, but I'm not privy to detail that. Because I'm still waiting on some more information, and I've also got my internal AMD development as well, which I've got on Windows 10 at the moment, and I'll do my Windows 11, and then I'll do a bit of a head-to-head, and I'll report back to you as well. So,
great.
That's on the to-do list. Now, one thing. Now, Chris, and again, I know I'm a pain in the ass, but you actually gave me some time and energy, and you did some testing on your M1, and you did some testing on the Mac Pro. Now, we did start this on the last show, but we were getting a bit confused because we were basically using different test sessions. So we're all on the same page at the moment. And you have some interesting stuff to share. And then I'll actually add the M1 Max results in the 12900K. And then, again, these are not conclusive, but it's a good follow-up to what you were saying previously. So that, in the GPU rendering and all of these other type of benchmarks that some of these, almost giddy reviewers are posting up, this is not panning out as much with the DAW stuff, but we do need to test across multiple DAWs. But do you want to share your testing, please?
Yeah, well, the testing is definitely showing that we're not seeing a massive jump on that new Mac platform as far as how many plugins we can load. It's pretty consistent with what we think it was going to be, but the 12th gen Intel and also what's coming out of the Mac Pro are far higher numbers. But they do need to be kind of put into context, as in that's just one part of that.
Yep.
But it's the part that's the most relevant to us.
Yes.
And that's kind of the interesting thing, that you are on that M1 platform jumping into something where in DAW land you're not quite seeing some of the massive performance boosts that other sectors are seeing. Now, I think that will possibly change over time, but at the moment, and I don't actually have that sheet in front of me, Vin, sorry. You might need to read out some of those numbers. But
I'll read them out.
It just links into, I think, what we were saying before, is that we're seeing a very understated performance in the thing that's the most relevant to us.
Yeah. Well, I've got the numbers, so I'll read them out for you. So this is your Mac Mini 2021. It's your just with the M1 processor. Now, just remind me how many performance cores?
It's 8 cores, that one.
Yeah, but how many P cores?
6, isn't it? Yes.
Okay,
6.
So it's 6. Yeah. So on that one, and then you've got a 12-core, 24-thread Xeon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know what the clock speeds are on the M1s, but it's kind of irrelevant. So at 64, little Mac Mini, 144 plugins, and the Mac Pro was 169. At 128, there was 148 plugins on the Mac Mini, and there was 241 on the Mac Pro, so that's starting to take off. And then at 256, there was still 148 on the M1. And now, what is that telling us? And then 249. So obviously the scaling's slowing down a bit, but you didn't get any more from 128 to 256. And then so 148, 249 on the Mac Pro, and then 150 at 512 and 257 on the Mac Pro. So there was a significant difference between those two. But if we compare then M1 Max, the M1 Max numbers, at 64 it was 189 compared to 144. So what's M1 Max? What's that? Is that 8? That's 8 performance cores, right?
Yes.
Okay. So,
and the Ultra jumps to 20, but we haven't done any testing because we haven't been able to get our hands on one of those yet.
They're coming, but we need to get our hands on one. But the Max is a good thing because it's half a glued Ultra, right? So between the Mac Mini and the M1 Max, there's an extra 2 cores, 189 to 144, 198 to 148. 199 to 148, and then 213 to 150. So that's getting a little bit closer to the Mac Pro, but it's still, it's actually better at 64, and then marginally behind, significantly behind at the other latencies. But if we call in the 12900K numbers, it's just another world, right? Because we're talking 428 at 64, 448 at 128, 461 at 256, and 475 at 512. Now, this is the exact same test using Reaper's internal RIA XCOM, right, at 32 bands. Now, it's not conclusive because we're going to throw up a couple of questions, which I don't know just yet. The answer to is, how well optimized is Reaper for M1? Now, I've had some preliminary conversations with Justin about that, and there are he'll just say that the threading is a work in progress with anything to do with Mac and M1 and third-party DAWs. And how optimized are the plugins, across platform? And the other question that I might get you to kind of double check for me, is there any way if you can check whether that application is running under Rosetta? I thought I saw a mention of someone called up some type of monitoring app, and it was monitoring, for example, there was some plugins that were supposed to be M1 native, and they weren't. They were still actually running under Rosetta. So, the term was M1 compatible, right? But they were still running under Rosetta. So is there any way of actually monitoring whether it's running native or via Rosetta?
Yeah, you can do it in the Apple menu. You can actually bring up a section that shows you what Rosetta is running.
Yep.
But you've also got to be a little bit careful with Reaper, because Reaper on Mac, there's a couple of different versions you can download depending on your OS. What should be happening is when you launch the most current one that's made for M1 is that it shouldn't allow any not native M1 plugins to work. So
Right.
if they're third party, they don't show.
Yep.
The internal one should be. But yes, there's certainly a way to monitor if any processes are off doing that. That's going to improve, I think, over time. I think I just saw just days ago there was another major plugin manufacturer that just last week went, yay, we're M1 compliant. So it's certainly taking some time.
Yep.
And I think this is kind of going back just 1 second against 12th gen and Windows 11 is I think it's a very key, well, pure speculation here. I think it's a very key relationship between those two things and Task Scheduler working in a very efficient way to combat, what's going on the Apple platform, because I think the last thing that anyone wants to see is companies like DaVinci Resolve or Blackmagic saying, well, on my M1, I can render this project at this much faster than this. But I think the 12th gen is certainly giving everything a good run for its money. And hopefully now, I mean, pure speculation, maybe a lot of the supply of this stuff and maybe a lot of the pausing on motherboard manufacturers on the Intel AMD side were possibly waiting to see what this next Ultra thing was going to do before they kind of went full steam ahead. I would expect to see some of this stuff on the Windows Intel side go full steam ahead now. That they kind of see a little bit of what the Apple plan is, possibly.
Yep. Well, interestingly, on that note, X299, which I love the platform, but it's we'll call it, it's like fine wine. It's getting there. It's very well aged and very stable, and we know where the bodies are buried in. It is still quite capable, but the architecture is now 3 gens old. The core architecture. There should have been an X299 replacement probably about 18 months ago, and there was all these leaks, X699 chipset, and then there was 2 variations of the sockets, and then there was so it was following the Xeon, the Xeon platform that was in the Mac Pro, and that was supposed to land in the HEDT space. Now, that didn't eventuate, and then they stretched X299 to, it was supposed to be middle of this year. So we were hearing end of Q2, start of Q3. There's a I forgot the actual name of it, and it'll probably change again, but it's a workstation HEDT X299 replacement. There's no X in the chipset name, and it is going to be introducing the core architecture of the 12th gen, but in higher core counts, and rumor has it it's up to 56 cores, right? This is in the HEDT space, not the Xeon space, up to 56 cores. Whether that's a monolithic core or whether they're going to get the glue gun out, I don't know. They do have, if it's based on the current Xeon, well, the current Xeon has anywhere from I think it's a 12, this is monolithic, 12 core up to a 38. So it almost mirrors the Threadripper going, 12, 16, 24, 32. That's the Threadrippers, right? And then above 32 is 38. So it's 38 max, 76 thread, where the Threadripper then doubles to 64 and 128 thread, right? So they're catching up as far as the number of cores, but without gluing stuff together. So the new, actually, I've just remembered, W790 is the new platform if people want to kind of have a bit of a search. So it's the new HEDT. I doubt we're going to be getting a 56 core at that level, but I would be not surprised if we get at least 32. So if you start picturing 32 cores with the 12th gen architecture, and I think it's a generational bump again, that's going to be pretty mental, So, I mean, the core thing that I'm seeing now is that, especially with the 12th gen, is that you're not needing as many cores. And this is a conversation. This is a conversation that is ongoing. But my core clients that are the large template composer guys, they're still going to need a bunch of cores. But those people that are just focusing more on more just tracking and a moderate number of virtual instruments and stuff, they could easily make do with the smaller core 12th, right? So there's that whole argument, and then is do they need to continue scaling with the number of cores, or is that going to be slowing down? I don't think in general the core counts are going to be slowing. They're still going to be releasing more larger core machines, but whether the general audio professional is going to be needing those higher cores is going to be the question, right? That's because I've just been seeing more and more where people have gone, look, I've gone to 12th gen, it's 8 performance cores, it's just doing everything that I need. And so I think that's going to be the larger target sector, but I'm still going to be very happy to see that X299 replacement, just to see where it lands, because I do like the options of machines with larger PCIe lanes options. So if someone comes to me and they said, I need to run 2 HDSPE cards and a couple of UAD cards, that ain't going into a Z690. And it's not going into X570 AMD machine. It won't happen. So I do need a HEDT replacement. I could look at the Threadrippers, but the problem with the Threadrippers is that the core counts are above a certain, they're above that threshold where everything doesn't start synchronizing and parallelizing correctly, and we'll run into that same problem with the Intel HEDT replacement as well, I think. So it's an interesting thing where the software seems to be kind of stalled, if that's the correct word, in regards to how it actually manages the larger core machines. But the core, the hardware is still needing to kind of progress. So I don't know if you guys have got any thoughts on that as well. Why we're still seeing that kind of thread ceiling on the software, and are they focusing? And actually, we know that they're not focusing on those larger core machines.
No, they're not. But it's an excellent battle, isn't it? I mean, it's going to play out really well. There's no clear winner here. They're two very different approaches, whether you look at what Apple are going to keep doing, or you look at what Intel are going to keep doing. There's something for everyone. It's going to pan out pretty well. It's going to be pretty epic, I think. And hopefully there is room for everyone's requirement. That there's no doubt the focus is not on those bigger core systems. And I think some of these DAW companies will be forced to now. I mean, I don't think they can keep avoiding it. They might have to do some rewrites. They might have to, do some clever coding to kind of, get around this. But mate, what an epic 12 to 24 months it's going to be to see all this pan out. Yeah.
Well, look, I've been monitoring the threading on these larger chips for, probably 2 years now. They're still not connecting the dots. Steinberg had a problem with Cubase 11, which they resolved in Cubase 12, where anything above an 18-core 36-thread machine, so if you had a 24-core /48 Threadripper, everything would land on one core. It wouldn't even thread schedule at all. It wasn't load balancing or scheduling at all. So I don't know how that one got past QA, but they're obviously not focusing on those larger machines for that stuff to be able to slip through. They've made an announcement that it now supports 128 cores, but in the same breath, I'm following threads where ASIO Guard is falling apart, and Pete, the M word's going to come out, right? Because ASIO Guard on is falling over. Now, tell me if this kind of sounds familiar, right? So there's two scenarios. One was that people they'll be loading a Cubase 11 session into Cubase 12, and then on the Cubase 11 session it was running very, very comfortably with the ASIO Guard and the real time and all the rest of everything was running beautifully. They put it in the Cubase 12 and the ASIO Guard meter goes through the roof and the whole thing's collapsing, right? And they were trying to pinpoint what was going on, and they finally narrowed it down that it was being caused by respective plugins or virtual instruments that had their own multi-processing routines capabilities, right? And that was then thread, it was all thread collision stuff happening with the Cubase. But, this is with ASIO Guard on. So we're not talking ASIO Guard off now. We're not talking about core limiting. We're talking ASIO Guard on. These things were collapsing sessions. And I thought, well, okay, so I'm just monitoring that. And up comes a second one this week, which I rolled my eyes and let out a few swear words, was that they have now discovered that if you have, and this is interesting, if you have a hardware buffer that is the same size as your ASIO Guard buffer. Now, let me just reiterate that in every previous version with ASIO Guard, you couldn't do that. So say, for example, you've got the standard setting for ASIO Guard is 23 milliseconds, right? Or 1024. And if you moved, so you would have a hardware buffer anywhere from 32 samples all the way to 1024. That was not going to move. But if you move, 032 to 512, that hybrid buffer was not going to move. It's still going to be 1024. But if you moved it to 1024, it automatically bumped it to 2048, right? So, and if you had ASIO Guard in the low setting where it was only 13 milliseconds, the bump would happen above 256, all right? So it would just automatically bump to the next hybrid buffer setting. Now they're saying that if you have the same hardware buffer setting to your ASIO Guard setting, that, and I don't know how they're doing that, so they've actually changed something, right? And if you track armed an instrument, it could send a pretty major spike and cause playback issues. Now, I don't know about you, but that's kind of sounding really familiar to me, because as soon as you track arm something, you're shifting the threading from all your available logical to half minus one, right? That is still happening in Cubase 12. So here we have a problem that as soon as you track arm something, it's shifting something in the back end to the threading, right? And it's causing spiking. Now, I was reporting that in 2019. Yeah, no worries, working as designed, right? So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but the one that got me swearing is they said it affects CPUs 12 to 32 cores. In other words, even the 6-core to 16-core, right, with logical. That's a pretty big umbrella. And it said only happening on Intels. Now, let me tell you, that one sat me flat on my ass. So whatever they've introduced is causing problems as soon as they call in the real-time engine only on Intels between 12 and 32 cores. Now, just between you and me, do you think that covers a wide range of users?
I would think so. I would think like between 12 and 32 cores that's pretty common.
Common? That's a 6-core, 12-thread to 16-core, 32-thread. And so obviously it affects the 18-core as well.
Oh, including the logicals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. They're saying 12 to 32. They're not saying 12-core, 24-thread to 32-64. They're saying 12 cores.
Yeah.
12
So it's
threads.
basically everybody that's not on a netbook.
Yep. And only Intel. So I've just gone, yeah, awesome. So I'm going to crank it up. I'm cranking up the Benny Hill theme. It's a Benny Hill theme, and that whole thing with the core count, that smacks of MMCSS. Sorry, Pete, it came out, right? The Kryptonite came out, but that smacks of the same MMCSS tap dance that we've been navigating since Cubase 10. So I'm not going to say anything further on that one, but I wasn't very, very happy as soon as I heard Intel only. I just gone, oh boy, you guys have got some work to do there. I don't know how they're going to pull that one back.
Sounds like you're going to have to put your Cubase dongle in the drawer for a little bit, mate.
Oh no, mate! I'm running Cubase 9 on a machine with my MMCSS fix. Hey, I got the M word in again, Pete. MMCSS. How many drinks is that? Is that what time is it over there?
I'm sorry, I was too busy drinking to.
Yeah.
Moving right along.
All right. Now I'm looking at the time because I know we're aware that because of the time zone shifts, myself and Chris started an hour earlier and Pete started an hour later, so I'm aware of the time. So just real quickly, the only other thing that I really want to share is, in the trenches, of product support. Now, I've got a couple to share. I'm not sure if Chris has got any, but I'll share two that have been some recent things that I've navigated with some clients. One was I had a client that contacted me who's got a big Pro Tools HDX system. And he said to me, he goes, mate, it's bizarre. He goes, all my Waves plugins have stopped working and there's some problems with some USB and all the rest of it. So I said, look, the best thing would be just bring the system over. And sure enough, all the Waves had been knocked out. And but I checked all the USB ports, everything else was working. Pro Tools was firing up. Just the Waves plugins were missing. And then I figured out what it was. And his studio is more remote away from his main building. So he was using a Wi-Fi Ethernet, and the Waves copy protection is locked to the MAC address of the machine. And it had authorized on this Wi-Fi adapter, which died. So the Wi-Fi adapter died, and it just immediately just knocked out the license because it no longer had the MAC address to actually, access to activate the copy.
Could you hear that sigh coming from me over here? It's like,
yes. So what was real interesting though is that I went, okay. So I put and he was running some really nice Euphonics controllers that I'd set up. This is like 8 years ago. This machine but it's basically a big tape recorder, right? So it's an 8-year-old machine, and I'd set up some not dynamic IP for the Euphonics. At the time, we needed to kind of set the IPs, and so I needed a secondary. I put a secondary Ethernet adapter in, and then I fired up Waves because there was no way we're going to get confused, right? So we had the chances of the hardware Ethernet dying would be very slim. And so I put a second Ethernet in, connected it up, fired up his Waves app, and it said, oh, by the way, you've already recovered these licenses in a 12-month period. We're not going to allow you to recover your licenses. And it was a month. So luckily he had, some downtime and family time. And so I had this machine here for a month, and we're waiting for the tipping point. And sure enough, I fired it up and got his Waves back, and he's a happy man, right? So that was one. The other one, and now I'm taking a deep breath, Pete.
Yeah.
because it's another one of those favorite companies of mine. And I'll give you the backstory. So, again, another good client of mine who, this machine was deployed in a main studio that was featuring RME AES originally, right? So it was running RME AES, HDSP AES, and it was running into some nice links converters. And so that was the main studio, but it's been moved to a secondary studio. So we moved him, and the other AES and the links had to stay in the main rig, in the main room on another system. So we moved them just to a HDSP AIO Pro, one of the newbies. Beautiful little cards. So put it into the same PCIe slot, loads the driver up, not a problem, starts working away, gets to the mix stage of the of the project, then says, you know what, I'm going to bump the buffer up, and it wouldn't allow him to change the buffer setting. Everything's grayed out. I've gone, what the hell's going on? I've never seen anything like that on an RME card. And so he didn't contact me initially, but he got in contact with the guys at RME support, and they're saying, oh, look, there's something going on with your PCIe slot. That's kind of odd. Try changing your PCIe slot. And so he did, and I think it came good. Well, he thought it came good. But of course, as we move a little bit further on and he starts adjusting buffer settings, and this thing has, again, locked itself onto a particular buffer setting, and it won't allow me, everything else is grayed out. And he contacts me. I went, look, stop moving PCIe slots. It's got nothing to do with PCIe slots. There's something else that's actually blocking that. And I didn't put two and two together initially, but of course, one of those 4 a.m. epiphany moments, I remembered that about 3 or 4 months earlier, I had a similar problem, not similar, but a problem with my UCX. So it wasn't even a PCIe, it was a UCX. On a machine within Reaper, when I was trying to change the buffer, it would still allow me to change the buffer, but the playback was completely garbled. It would only work on the buffer setting that the machine was booted on, right? And I went, And the solution back then was SonarWorks. That's why I'm sighing. SonarWorks system-wide was the thing that was capturing the driver and blocking any buffer setting stuff. And so my 4 a.m. epiphany was that I wonder if this is the same problem. So I rang him the next morning and said, hey, you wouldn't be happening to run SonarWorks system-wide? He says, yeah, why? I went, while I'm on the phone, can you just do something for me? He goes, yeah, sure. I went, can you just go into the add remove, just remove system-wide. Don't remove all of SonarWorks, just remove the system-wide and restart the system for me, and I'll wait. And he goes, right, and does it. Yep, system's up. I went, cool, fire up your door. It was Cubase. I said, fire up your door. Yep. All right, go into your hardware audio interface settings. Yep, just call up the control panel. You can control it. You could call it up from the bottom, but just within Cubase. So I want it to be within the door, right? So it's ASIO drivers activated, right? That was the reasoning. ASIO drivers activated, and I went, right. Change your hardware buffer. He goes, Vin, it's not going to do it. I'm going, can you just do it? And he goes, I can hear shit and a couple of expletives, which I won't go into, but there was some beauties. We'll call it, the Tuesday Man. Do you know that one? You know what a Tuesday Man is, guys?
No. Is that some Australian thing?
Yes. See you next Tuesday. Do you know what that is? So there was a few.
Oh, yeah.
There was a few of the Tuesday men floating around. And so he just said that was it all along. But that was about a 3-4 month period where he was in the wilderness, and I said, you should have called me earlier. He goes, but you didn't know what it was straight away. I went, yeah, no, but you caught me late afternoon. And I said, I got the epiphany at 4 a.m. So that's what it was. So SonarWorks system-wide somehow interferes with the WDM portion of the driver. But because the RME and the WDM driver is so integrated, it was blocking the ASIO as well. So that was the reason. Because I spoke to Matthias about it, and I went, wow, can you with both of you guys, they're your countrymen, can you just send them a polite email and tell them, keep your hands off our bloody drive? So that's what it was. SonarWorks system-wide.
So I'm guessing that they lock the driver in exclusive mode, set a sample rate, and then the driver is not able to renegotiate one with ASIO. So
correct.
Yeah. I mean, it actually makes sense thinking about it, but boy, what a pain in the ass that has to be.
It does make sense to you? That it actually blocks the ASIO driver?
Because some of them, like if you think about the hardware device, some of the drivers will support both WDM and ASIO audio at the same time.
Well, this is what RME does, right? So it's multi-client,
So like my Motu stuff does that and some other things, right?
Yep.
If the sample rate's not the same, you're screwed. Because if in exclusive mode, it doesn't go through the Windows mixer or anything, it goes, I don't want to say straight to the hardware, but about as close to straight to the hardware as you can get outside of ASIO.
Yeah.
So I could see where that would happen.
And this is exactly what was happening. So guess what? If you had SonarWorks system-wide on your Motu, it would be doing exactly the same thing. So there's some interfaces that will not be affected because they have a separate WDM driver to the ASIO driver, if you know what I mean, Pete. There's two actually distinct drivers. And then with that one, that kind of masks the problem because it's not going to interfere with your ASIO.
And a lot of them simply don't support doing WDM audio at the same time as ASIO. So
yeah, well, so there you go. So anyone listening in, SonarWorks system wide. So if you're having problems with sample rate and buffer locking and all the rest of the type of stuff, and and you know what, I've read some other posts where people are reporting similar type of things and they can't resolve it, and I feel like going, you wouldn't have. I'm like, no, staying out of this one, staying out of.
Or any of the other similar apps that do kind of audio rerouting and stuff like that. It's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, like some of those banana, whatever they were called. You know, those, you know those ones. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's my in the trenches. I don't know, Chris. Have you got any that you care to share? Or
I got a quick one.
Yeah.
It's not just one. I've probably had about a dozen odd plugin problems that I've had to save. Not even really what I should be doing, but do that anyway. So I've come up with 4 hot tips for plugins. You ready?
Go.
It is autumn here, right, in Australia. So it's the time where you go in and make sure that all the plugins that you have purchased over the last 12 months, that you have copies of them, you know where the installers are, that you know how to access the accounts where they live, and that you generally put them into some tidy order is a good idea. If you're moving through updating your operating system on both Mac and Windows and you are one of those people that necessarily needs to do it all the time, make sure that your plugins are up to date as well. There's absolutely no need at all to install VST3, VST2, AAX, RTAS, and AU audio unit plugins all at once if you don't need them all. So VST3 versions are what we kind of prefer. You don't need to tick every single box. And just be mindful of the subscriptions. You know, I've had a couple of customers that keep paying lots of money for their waves. You know, they've got 48 plugins that load all the time and they only use 3 or 4 of them, mostly.
Yep.
You know, maybe pay for those 3 and 4. That way your subscriptions are less and you don't have 4,800 plugins loading every time that you don't need. It's just really about keeping that tidied up. The amount of mucking around that I've had to do over the last 6 months of people not really knowing where their licenses for the plugins that they just bought are, not knowing how to log into those websites and see what they own. Just keep it a bit tidy because, you know, computers do die, hard drives do die, things do need to be reinstalled. Keep it nice and tidy and you'll have less problems. That's all I've got for this week.
Awesome.
Nice. Good stories, and I appreciated Chris channeling a little bit of BuzzFeed there with his top 5. That was great.
The top 5. All right. Well, I think we can actually wind this up now, and I know Pete needs to kind of vacate. So let's round this up. Thank you again to both of you for your time and energy. That's been awesome. We covered another stack. I'd say we'll be back in 3 months again, guys. Yeah, I think that's a wrap, guys. Alrighty.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
You're most welcome. All right, on to the next.